Welcome to Guitar Wisdom. My name is Dan Malott. In this video, we're going to talk about the CAGED system, which is a system for understanding the guitar through the use of positions. And a lot of people have varying opinions about how to do this and why it works, but I really strongly feel CAGED system is the best one. It's a 5-position system. It's simple. It's elegant. It is already in use in a lot of the licks that you probably already know, and it's based on simple chord forms that you've probably played most of. So when it comes to favoring this system over other systems that you might have heard, for example, a lot of people talk about the modal system, which I think is kind of a misnomer. I think the modal system would be better described as a 7-position system. People connect it to the modes, but I might spend an entire video debunking that because I really don't think that the 7-position system should be attached to the modes. The modes are something else. They're not a system for understanding the guitar. Maybe we'll talk about that at some future point. If you want to argue with me about that, have a gentleman's debate, go ahead and put it in the comments. We'll talk about it. I'll try to explain some of the reasons why I think this is the best system. The CAGED system is better. But let's just jump right in to part one of trying to understand how do you put this system onto the neck of the guitar. And the way that you do that is through the use of bar chords. In video one, we're going to talk about finding the placement of 5 different bar chords on the neck. In video 2, we'll talk about how that translates into scale forms. Later videos, we're going to get into how to derive pentatonics from those same 5 scale positions, and we'll probably go through some additional exercises, maybe some arpeggios, look at how you can transpose different licks into different keys, how you play things across the entire neck. So why do you need this? Well, you've seen great players play fluidly up and down the neck as if they were just completely unhindered by the mystery that hinders the rest of us. The mortals who are looking at the guitar very confused about where do you play a given thing and what happens if you don't want to play it there, you want to play it here, you want to move up. And this comes up chiefly, I think, in improvisation, where as an improviser on the guitar, if you are bound by a scale position, then you're missing 70% of the rest of the neck. So how do you unlock the remainder of all of these other positions? And you know you can play a key of G all over the place, so why be stuck in a position or two? Well, a great player will seem to do this effortlessly, move up and down the neck as if they're not playing in scale positions, but I guarantee you there is still this underlying concept of where the scale positions are, and that is informing what they're playing. So I really want to emphasize that it's crucial for you to have a system to understand how the guitar works, because when you're playing the key of G, which we're going to use as an example here, you really want to see the key of G all up and down the neck. But for the practical purposes of what your fingers are going to translate that into from movement to movement, it's important to confine your practice, at first at least, to these given scale positions so that you can learn some fingerings and have those muscle memory fingerings to lean on when you're going to play whatever it is you're going to play, whether it's an improvisation or it doesn't really matter what it is you're going to play. Having that framework of the scale positions is really crucial. So that's why I wanted to make this topic the first video on this channel of Guitar Wisdom, because I see this understanding lacking in so many players. And I went years without really understanding the system. I learned the 7-position system and found that it really did not give me what I needed to know. Later, when a wonderful teacher of mine at Berkeley named Tomo Fujita said, you don't know the 5 positions, do you? And I had to admit, no, I didn't really know the 5 positions. I knew each form, or maybe 3 or 4 of them, but that was a lot different than really grasping the entire system. And Tomo painstakingly proceeded to drill me on this system. He had learned from Joe Pass, so I figured he was probably an authority on understanding the guitar. And so I was very thankful for that. That's the kind of guitar wisdom that I hope to pass on to you. So how are we going to make sense of the system? We're going to start with the chord forms C, A, G, E, and D. That's why the CAGED system is called what it is, because we're going to use these 5 shapes that you already know: C, G, D, A, and E. However, we're going to translate them into bar chords so that they can be moved up the neck. Some of these chords you already know and are very useful for rhythm guitar, chord playing, strumming. Some of them are not very useful, and you're not going to use them in these bar chord forms that I'm going to give to you in very many practical situations. However, they still provide this kind of foundation for how to move from one position to the next and be able to place them so that there's no more guesswork involved in how you're going to move them down the neck. All right, so we're going to do this example in the key of G. So I'm going to take each one of these 5 chords and play them in a place where they are a G chord. So for example, we're going to begin down here at the low end of the neck, and G is one of the chords in the CAGED system, but when we do it in the key of G, it's that open G chord that you know and love. So we're not really going to talk about that one because it isn't relevant to any of the other keys that you might use this within, but it'll come back later as a bar chord. So we're going to move up to the next position where we can play a G chord with one of these 5 forms, and we don't use any open strings. And that's by using this root right here. We're going to be thinking about roots a lot because they provide sort of that focal point for where are we going to play this chord shape. You have to be able to find roots on the 6th string, and you got to be able to find them on the 5th string. And in the case of one of the positions, with the chords side of things, it's helpful to be able to find them on the 4th string. So that's not too hard because there's this octave relationship that you probably know from the power chord. But let's concentrate chiefly right now on the 6th string roots and the 5th string roots. So our example is the key of G. We're looking for the G on the 6th string. Okay, that's here. And then we also need to find G on the 5th string, and that's here. It would be helpful for us to know where that G comes back an octave higher, which is 12 frets away from where I'm doing it. So this was a 3rd fret G. That means on the 6th string, it's going to come back again on the 15th fret, where everything will sort of start over. So make sure that you're aware of 6th string G on the 3rd fret, 5th string G on the 10th fret. And while we're at it, let's make sure we mark where this 4th string G is on the 5th fret here. Once you have that reference point for where are your roots, then you can begin to place the rest of the bar chord shapes. So the first one we're going to start with here on the 6th string G is the E form. So if you know this open E chord, we're just going to take this very well-known open E chord and use a bar so that we can move it up. Chances are, if you've been playing guitar for a little while, you've played this chord a lot. And if you do it here on the 3rd fret, then this makes it a G chord. It's no longer an E chord. We moved it up from E, F sharp, G. Once you can find this chord, you can chain the rest of them to each other. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. However, after a while of playing these, hopefully they become a little bit more automatic for you to just be able to pinpoint any given one of the 5 chord positions without necessarily having to build from one to the next. That's really the objective here with part 1, is that you're able to find the placement for the major chords. And there's 12 of them. We're only going to talk about one in the example. We'll briefly touch upon another one at the end just for some contrast. But then it's going to be up to you to move these around the neck using this system and be able to do any one of the chords. You know, if I say D flat, you should be able to play D flat in 5 or even 6 places if you repeat them at the 12th fret point. So once you find this first chord, in this case it's the E chord, you'll always be able to get to the next one using this tactic that I'm about to describe right here. They're always going to go in order. So if I have this E form here on the 3rd fret, this 4th finger note right here is another G. That's the octave of that G. So these are both G roots here. And this chord, or this note here, G, forms the basis as the root for the next chord shape, which is the D form. You can see the D shape that I'm using here looks like that open D chord, as if I were going to bar that open D note and start moving it up until I find a G. Now, I said some of these were practical for strumming purposes. This one is not. This is not an easy chord to play. It's got this goofy stretch. It's not very practical. You're not going to use this a lot. However, it's really important to see the location for the D form scale that we'll be associating with this later. So make sure you can go from the E form, find the 4th finger note, which is also a G root, and be able to place this D form chord. Once you can find the D form chord, you'll probably recognize this triangular shape here is going to show up in the next form, and that's the C form. If I take this triangle and do it instead with a 1st finger bar and my 2nd finger to form the triangle, then I can easily form the rest of the shape for the C form chord, and you'll see that 4th finger root is the one that we were targeting on the 5th string for our other location that we really want to be very comfortable finding a root. So this is the 10th fret, 5th string G here, and that's going to form the foundation of this C form chord, and moving higher up the neck, the next one, which is the A form, where I'll be replacing this 4th finger with a 1st finger and doing the A form. You could probably see here that that looks a lot like our open A chord. If I were to bar the 3 fingers that I usually play for an A chord, put my 1st finger where the open string would be, I can slide up and play this A form chord as a bar chord higher up the neck. Let's just do a quick recap here. We've got the E form, 4th finger becomes the root of the D form, triangle here changes, becomes the C form. Now my root is there on the 5th string, and that translates to a 1st finger to become the A form chord. Now this 3rd finger bar here becomes a 1st finger bar, and I can complete the rest of the G form, which looks like our open G chord here. However, on the G chord, which I have to say I use this once in a while in rhythm guitar sorts of situations, and I like the way it sounds. It does have to be modified a little bit from the open G chord because you just don't really have enough fingers. It's not practical to bar here and try to get that 1st string note. It just doesn't really work out. So I usually put my 4th finger and 3rd finger and 1st finger here, forget about that 1st string, and just play a 5-string chord here. So that's the G form chord, and you can see now we're back to a 6th string root here. If we wanted to repeat the whole thing again, although we're getting kind of cramped, we could do that by changing that 4th finger back to the 1st finger, which is just the repeat of where we started, but 12 frets higher, and we could do another E form chord up here. So that covers the entire neck from the open G, which we said we weren't really going to bother with because it's only relevant to this key, but then moving along to our first closed position here, and moving all the way up the neck through 5 different positions, and then repeating where we started. And you could keep going, obviously, although it's not very practical to play in these higher positions using these chord shapes. But, of course, for reference purposes, when you're trying to play scales up there, you'll need to know where they repeat again. So what we just did here was play a G chord 5 different ways so that we could blanket the entire neck with chord shapes. Now, is that practical for you to use as a rhythm guitar technique? Sort of, because some of these will work as rhythm guitar forms and some of them won't. But when we move on to the next video and we replace these chord shapes with scale shapes, you'll really see why this caged system is so incredibly important. And that's because it gives you that understanding of how to play a scale all the way across the neck in 5 different places without a lot of overlap. Now, there's some overlap, but one of my complaints about the 7-position system is that there's a needless amount of overlap. You don't need 7 positions to cover the entire neck of the guitar. And even in the 5-position system, there's some overlap. You could probably get away with 4. There would be some gaps, but the 5-position system is pretty elegant. So I think it gets the job done. It allows you to play up and down the neck 5 different positions of a scale in a given key. If you can play the scale in a given key, you can play any lick in any of these 5 positions. As long as you have that framework for understanding where they belong, you can play anything you want. So let's move on to video number 2. Just give a click here. Don't forget to give us a like, subscribe if you like what you've heard so far. We're going to move on. We're going to talk about the scale shapes. In later videos, like I said, we're going to get into some more advanced implementations of this, and we're going to make sure that we talk about pentatonics, because that's, of course, a really important aspect of knowing these scale positions. So let's go for it. Part 2.